And we're on live with Nardeep Khurmi, filmmaker, creator, writer, director of Pagg, and also star, right?
Yes, I do star in it.
And it's a really great film that needed to be made. I can see how it could be super, if I was Sikh, I totally get that. And I don't think you need to be Sikh, but I mean, think certainly in this time and climate, it hits really home. So before I intro the thematically, the film thematically, and really just start in the questions of play it forward, let me just give you a chance to say hi, intro yourself, and say anything you like.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm super excited to share Pug with everybody. I'd say it's taken me about 10 years to get to the point where I could make a film like this, and I don't know. I'm proud of all the work that everyone put into it because I think we've got something that's powerful and poignant without being too, I think, in your face. Hopefully, the films obviously touches on racial relationships and the American climate that we're living in right now. But I don't know. I'm just excited to share it with people, and I'm so glad that the feedback has been positive with the film because you never know with stuff like this. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, totally get that. I mean, it's scary putting out a work that's so personal and at the same time it's so important, and it really makes filmmaking so much more resonant. The stories we tell when we are making ourselves vulnerable in the telling of it.
Yeah, I feel like most of my work over the last, since film school and on, everything has been pretty personal to a point. But I think this is the first time I really went deep with something. It was both personal and about a bunch of other stuff. So it really did elevate the material in a way that I wasn't expecting. I always say that if I'm scared to put it out or scared to write it or scared to be on set doing it, that's a good place to be.
Right.
And, and that was definitely how I felt this entire process because it was such a quick turnaround too when I decided to make it. And it just sort of was like, nope, we got to do this right now. And I kind of, from the time I decided to write it till the time we finished it, it was in 10 months.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great.
yeah, which was a really, I mean, for a short film, I mean, for those who don't make films, that might seem like, oh, that seems normal, but that's a really quick turnaround
Yeah, that's a
considering
great
like,
turnaround.
yeah, pre-production, fundraising, post-production, the whole thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited to share it.
And that's probably one of the reasons, or at least that's my interpretation, that you said it took you 10 years to make. Is that right? Is it because it's so scary?
Um, to be perfectly honest, Trump's election is what kicked my ass
Oh,
and got me into gear to make it. And I think that's what those 10 years are. I mean, when I was in film school, I was making personal stuff at the same, and I liked the work that I was making over the last 10 years. A lot of it was comedy and sketch comedy, things like that. But I think when the election happened, it sort of made me re-examine why I was making movies and the types of stories I was telling. And I had this realization where I'm like, well, look, if I'm living in Los Angeles trying to be, living this sort of quote unquote starving artist lifestyle, it better be for a reason. So the stories I tell better be for a reason. And something clicked in my head and I realized, oh, I have a voice and there are certain stories that I can tell that no one else is going to tell and no one else seems to want to tell. So let's try that. Let's tell one of these stories that I've never even, I had maybe like ideas of, but never really went and followed through with.
mhm.
So yeah, I think it was like the 10 years of sort of craft, like understanding how to make a movie and
Yeah,
sort
I
of my
see.
aesthetic approach. And
Hmm.
then that election happened and it was like, all right, time to tell the story now.
Got it.
Have
So,
them, now
yeah.
tell them.
So between like craft and purpose and your own life, it's all kind of culminated in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we always wish that we would like we're like 21 years old and we make our first film and we get nominated for an Oscar. And I obviously had those ideals too. I was like, oh, if it's not 25, 21, we'll be 25, then it'll be 27. But
Right. Sure.
this is honestly my favorite piece that I've made, and I think it's the most complete piece I've made thus far. And I feel like if this is representative of the work going forward, then I'm in a good place.
That's great.
You know, regardless of how long it's taken me to get to that point where it's like, oh, here's your voice. I guess they always say that, you know, find your voice, speak from your voice, but it's it's a pretty like miraculous thing when you do realize like, oh, I do have a voice, and you're able to put it in concrete terms. And I think that's what this film was. And I think it took me 10 years to get to that point to be comfortable with that.
Well, you know, it's interesting that, you know, our conversation that so far has really focused on voice, because I'm about to ask a question that's not really part of the format of the show, but I think it's interesting in terms of like the question in general and how it does fit in with Pagg specifically and the theme. And I guess let me just state the theme for the audience. It's like, okay, we've got a Sikh man who wears a turban. He's confused essentially for a terrorist, and he's a threat, and he's a object of contempt, and socially within the context of New York City, which is one of the most liberal cities in America. And so if you're an object of contempt in New York City, it's, you know, it's pretty bad. And the other, I guess, you know, what does he do? How does he resolve this conflict? And he chooses a way to resolve the conflict, which essentially limits his voice.
Yeah.
And it is culturally effacing versus promoting the cultural diversity that is America and is, you know, the central iconic figure, or at least one of the central iconic figures of New York City, the Statue of Liberty. You know, that is a representation of send me, you're tired, you're poor, etc. So, yeah, I guess in that context, like, and then like, okay, extrapolating that to the big picture of like, okay, I'm a human, I'm a filmmaker, whatever it is, or I happen to be both or one or the other, or I guess one without the other. Anyway, what does it mean to have a voice? What is a voice?
Oh, wow. I feel like we should be sitting on couches right now.
Yeah, smoking opium. Right?
Have a little notebook.
Yeah.
What does it mean to have a voice? Damn. I feel like if I could answer that for everybody, we would all have amazing stories to tell and no issues. I guess the way I could answer that is from a personal perspective. I think I always thought of having a voice, or I always thought my voice was, oh, I have to be like the best dramatic writer or comedic writer, whatever that is, or I have to like really, in terms of like mining my own life, I just have to put that on screen. But I realized that through this process that my voice actually may be, and I mean, this is going to sound a little pretentious, but I'm finding strength in giving voice to disenfranchised and underrepresented communities. To be able to give those communities a voice through whatever language I speak through film, whether that's through acting or directing or whatever, to tell these stories that people aren't telling. I'll give you the example. So kind of the inspiration for why I made this project, and I guess this will tie into the voice, was, so the day after the election, I was on the phone with a lot of people, you know, as we all were, like, oh my God, everything's burning down. What do we do? And I needed to take a break, and I was walking down my block to the 7-Eleven to get an Arizona iced tea, because they're 99 cents and they're delicious. And as I was walking down there, a truck, like a pickup truck, drove by with two good old boys, and they screamed, "Time to go home, Osama. It's our country now." And yeah, this is in Los Angeles at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunset Boulevard.
Right. And so did you scream back? I'm Sikh?
I mean, well, so like, it gets complicated, right? It's like, so Sikh people in particular get a lot of the brunt of this sort of terrorist rhetoric, simply because of like beards and turbans and things like that, because of imagery.
Brown.
Yeah, they're brown, and the thing is, they're like the most peaceful people on the planet, and part of the credo is that we never, you know, throw any other community under the bus. So even if someone was like, "You're a terrorist," you'd be like, "Oh wait, I'm not Muslim, but there's nothing wrong with that either. So you shouldn't be mean to me, and you shouldn't be mean to them." Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's like a very complicated thing. Actually, I made a stupid mistake, and I kind of chased them down the street, because I was like,
"Yeah, that's something I do."
Yeah, it's not ideal. Luckily, there was green light, so they didn't stop. But that kind of rhetoric I hadn't heard since 9/11. I was in high school during 9/11.
Oh,
so
geez. You heard it then too, huh?
What was that?
You heard it then too?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You'd hear it in school from like kids your age. I lived in a very white community, I was the person of color for the most part. Like, it was me and a handful of other people. And for the most part, everyone's wonderful, and I love the town I grew up in. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But, you know, like, we'd go to a diner and there'd be neo-Nazis there, or there'd be, you know, there's one of the largest contingents of the KKK is close to where I grew up. So I wasn't immune to it. And then I actually went to school in New York for college, and, you know, like you were saying, the most diverse city in the world, you deal with racism there every day. You know, the way people look at you, the way people treat you, maybe not overt racism. And I would never say that my experience is similar to, like, you know, a black man's experience, but you do feel it. And it's kind of happens mostly through microaggressions, through just like weird things people will say or assume, or just look at you or not look at you. And, you know, for example, I lived in New York for almost 8 years, and I was stopped and frisked twice, just for being by a building. God forbid a brown dude's by a building. But to go back to I guess the original question about the voice, I think that's what that experience kind of locked in for me was, okay, you know, I can write and tell all these romantic comedies that I really want to tell and maybe act in at some point. And I do want to tell those stories. But what's maybe more important for me at this moment is to use my voice to tell stories that other people won't be telling, and that those communities may not be able to tell themselves because they can't get it out there, or they maybe don't have the access or the terminology to say it, whereas I do. So it's like the gift of language that I have through filmmaking is sort of what I can use. I don't know if that answers your questions, kind of,
you know,
merry-go-round.
I think no, I think it was a there's a lot to that, you know, and I think what I take out of that essentially is that tapping into the higher consciousness and the experience that we have, and the higher consciousness that we have, which is a part of our unique experience, part of our unique DNA, mental, emotional, spiritual, if you, those who believe in that will, I do, composition, and to tap into that, and to then really see what it is you produce. And then as you're producing this thing, you use it to reflect, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this is me. You know, this is what I'm saying that is somehow unique to me, and it's and I think that voice is something that's cultivated, and it's cultivated by expression. And then when you express it, you know, it's so normal and quite the like the road for an artist or anyone who's practicing or beginning out on their craftsman journey is, hey, you start emulating other people. You know, you look at to see what you like and what's success, and you start replicating that, and then you become maybe good at it. And you say, oh, I like this certain thing, that, and the other. And Picasso said something once, pretty famous. He said, you know, a good artist borrows, a great artist steals. And to me, you know, that the tongue in cheek, what he meant is that, well, theft becomes mine. It's all of a sudden mine. I'm now the owner of it.
Personalizing the theft.
Yeah. It's like, hey, I took it. You did it. Great. Now I took it, and it's mine. It's, you know, and so, and I think in the process of that thievery, there also becomes some unique thing that other artists actually put into that toolkit. And it's like, okay, I've mastered these other tools that people use. And look, I invented this. This little widget can do this. And this is how I've kind of laid over a new direction and a new kind of means of expressing something that people will look at and say, oh, Nardeep did that. Yep, I get it.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So like I said, like it took me 10 years to make this movie, right? I feel like a lot in that 10 years was basically taking the stuff that I liked and trying it out in these other shorts that I was making and being like, oh, I like that. Or how can I, like you said, personalize it? And it was interesting with this film because this is the first time where I did my absolute best not to second guess any of my instincts.
Yeah.
Whether that was like
huge.
on set or in post-production. And it's been sort of revelatory for me to understand that because I feel like I fight this fraud complex,
Sure.
where it's like, you know, every success I have is just me lying really well, and every, you know, I'm just waiting for like the house of cards to crumble. But this project, yeah, I mean,
it's like join, like, you know, I think we can all sympathize.
Yeah.
At one point in time or another, yeah.
Yeah, it's rough. But with this project, I think it made me realize that, oh, wait a minute, the way I think about stuff, even though it might be different than how other people are thinking about it, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. If anything, it might be even more right, just because that is me putting my unique spin on stuff. So in this project in particular, it's been really interesting. The post-production process was really interesting, getting notes from people, trying to make the film as tight as possible while retaining what I wanted in it, and realizing like, oh yeah, there was a certain way I wanted to make this, and it works for me, and that's okay. And if it doesn't work for everybody, that's fine. But that's what I want to put out into the world, and that's what I want you to experience, and how I want you to experience it. And trusting that, I feel like, is again like a sort of a discovery of your voice, of like trusting that the way you're thinking about stuff works, and if it works, then run with it.
Totally. And I think that's a better clarification of what voice is too, is like, you know, having that vision, trusting it, and then seeing, you know, that this instinct, this impulse has been expressed, you know, this vision has been authentically expressed. At least it's another element or layer to the voice. So I think, so with that, we'll lead right into the first question, which we may have covered. Tell me, you know, if there's anything that we've left out, which is, what was the inspiration to make this film?
Sure. Well, so I guess I already mentioned my good old boy Trump truckers Osama moment. But as I was working on this idea, the idea kind of started with the idea of exploring microaggressions. I guess similar in the way that Get Out explored it. Get Out came out pretty much right after I started really percolating this idea in my head.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that. Microaggressions?
Microaggressions, yeah. They're the little things that people will do around you that they don't realize or aggressive, but kind of like add up to people. So like, for example, I mean, you know, your audience members, when they eventually watch the film, they'll be able to see a lot of them. But, you know, it'd be like going up to a Hindu person who doesn't eat beef and being like, oh, you don't eat beef? Do you eat pork? And they're like, well, yeah. They're like, well, what about chicken? Yeah, just like little things like that. Or maybe you're in a group of friends and you have an ethnic friend there and you mock their accent in a joking way. But they may not find that as a joke. They might just be like, huh, okay, you know, that's a little racist. It's like kind of like the minor prejudices and racisms that kind of bleed into society and into everyday life.
Sure. And obviously, both of those situations, like, you know, if it's a buddy of yours and you know him well, or somebody's just curious about you and saying, oh, do you eat X, Y, Z, blah, 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 you know, totally. Where those are not the context that you're, you know, talking about.
Right. A lot of it has to do with intention, right? So in Pagg in particular, one of my favorite sequences is this sequence on the subway, where it's just the main character who's turbaned and bearded up just sits on a subway car with a backpack. And then suddenly everyone around them starts to get really nervous. Really eye fucks them. Just, it's that, and he notices it because he notices it all the time because he knows everyone's always looking at him. And that, to me, is like the distillation of what a microaggression at least makes the person feel, like they're completely alone on an island surrounded by people. Right. But and again, it could just be like a really weird look of someone, context and intention, but they happen more frequently than you would think. It's funny. Like I didn't really, when I was growing up, again, I mentioned I grew up in a very sort of homogenous kind of community, and it wasn't until I moved to New York that I realized, oh, some of the stuff my friends in high school were saying were really, really weird. Like one of my nicknames in high school was the Indian. And, you know, I know they didn't mean anything bad by it, but I remember like coming home from summers from college and telling some friends, being like, yo, man, like, I know you didn't mean anything by it, but just going forward, you may not want to call me or any other Indian person Indian. Like your black friend, yo, what's up, black? Like, that's weird. You know, don't say stuff like that. So the script kind of came from wanting to explore microaggressions like that. And then what happened was there was I mean, obviously, most people know this. There have been a lot of hate crimes recently due to the election and everything that's been happening. Not the election, but a lot of stuff, a lot of shit's been stirred up in the water. And there were a lot of hate crimes towards South Asians in particular. And usually when they happen, they'd be reported on for a day, maybe, and then move on to the next news cycle. But there was one shooting in particular that happened in Kansas City. These two Indian fellows were in a bar just having a drink, and this white dude ran in and screamed, I forget exactly what he screamed. I have it written down somewhere, but he basically opened fire and killed this guy in this bar, then ran out, hid in a diner, and then the restaurant owner of the diner called the cops on this guy. And that was reported on for a number of days, almost a week. And yeah.
I'm from Kansas City, by the way. I grew up there. I was born in Kiev, but yeah, I grew up there.
Oh, no way. Well, you may have heard of the story then.
No, I don't listen to the news.
It's probably smart. Healthier that way. I'm constantly depressed every day, every time I
it's nothing good, man. Yeah.
Nothing good, man. Other than that blimp that was made in London, I appreciated that. If you saw that.
No.
They made a Trump baby with a diaper and a cell phone.
Okay.
Yeah, it was funny. But anyway, so this Kansas City shooting happened, and that one hit me hard in a way that a lot of them hadn't. I think mostly because it had been reported on through the whole week. Like it hit the zeitgeist. And around that same time, a bunch of South Asian people had been attacked either for being confused for being Muslim or just for being brown. Like there was a grandfather, he was like in his 80s, maybe, just walking down his son's neighborhood just in the middle of the day, and the police beat the shit out of him. There's another dude, I think it was in Northern California or Seattle or something, where he was shot in his driveway. So a lot of bad stuff was happening, and I was already thinking about microaggressions and what was happening in the United States.
Well, that's straight up hate crimes right there. And I mean, it's crazy because if this is happening, in the Sikh community, Indian, people from India and Pakistan, I mean, what the fuck's going on with the Muslim community?
Exactly, right? You just kind of have to extrapolate, like, okay, if these are mistaken hate crimes, which is terrible, imagine what these people would do to actual Muslims, and if given the opportunity. It's terrifying. But then as I started thinking about it, I originally conceived of the story about a Muslim character, and then I realized, like, I'm not Muslim, I haven't lived that life, I don't know what that is, but I do know what it is to be Sikh, even though that I'm not religious. A lot of my family members are, and that kind of is what kind of clicked everything together. I was like, oh, well, what would it be like if a Sikh man had to, or a Sikh man had to live in society like it is right now, which plenty of people have to. And what is life like when you're kind of afraid that anything, like shit could hit the fan at any moment, simply because of the way you look and because it's a misunderstanding and no one understands what you're about. So yeah, that's kind of like what inspired. It was like those kind of things, like the election, that moment I had out in the street thinking about microaggressions, and then those hate crimes that were reported, and sort of coalesced into this piece that, ends tragically, I guess.
And of course, to state the obvious, I mean, I think it is your emotional reaction to all that. I mean, it's just simply, this isn't fair. How can the world function this way? And it's not right.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I as I mentioned before, the news gets me depressed and angry quite a bit about, there's just so many injustices that are being done.
Right.
This, even within the last 2 years, yes, but even before that, there were plenty of injustices. I mean, you look at, again, the Black community and the relationship they have with the police. It's awful.
Yeah, I mean, you can trace injustice all the way back to the dawn of recorded history.
Exactly, and I guess this kind of ties into the idea of voice. I think that's where I found my voice, was realizing that, okay, you can be angry and you can be upset, or you can maybe do something about it. And I was like, well, maybe telling a story about a community no one really knows about might help you empathize with them, and if anything, help you, or push you to start asking questions. So you start thinking about things in a more concrete way, as opposed to this theoretical buzzword type world we're living in, where you can be outraged without actually knowing anything. You know?
That's awesome, man. And, you know, taking action in the face of injustice. And there's a quote that I came across just recently, and it's a quote of St. Augustine's, and it says, "Sin is misdirected energy."
Yeah.
You know, so you're rechanneling that misdirected energy into a positive place. So through that, to get to the second question, I mean, it's, you know, I think there's you know, it's a layered question. On some levels, we've answered it. On some levels, perhaps we can answer it more clearly. But what is the message of the movie?
Yeah. So it does end tragically, which has been an interesting conversation piece, because that was what I was intending. Living in America is hard. I don't know, for lack of a better term. It's a hard question for me to answer in a nutshell. I think the message is, and though the film explores it in a tragic way, ultimately I think what the message is for people is that we are all American and we all strive for the same things. We all strive to have, you know, healthy family lives, that we can live happily, do whatever it is that we want to do without the fear of anything happening to us or our families, or our communities. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what you look like or what faith you're a part of or whatever that is. Ultimately, we all want the same thing. We all want the American dream, the pursuit of happiness, you know? And I'm hoping that through this movie, you see that this sick man, I kind of take away a lot of the sort of whatever your preconceived notions of this man would be. Like, he's just a normal dude. He's as American as apple pie. And even he, who is like the most American, you know, red, white, and blue-blooded guy in the movie, who just happens to have a beard and a turban, even though we see him as being as American as possible, other people in the film don't see him that way. And then as a result, he doesn't see himself that way, which is ultimately the tragedy. So I'm hoping that when people watch this movie, that's kind of what they come away with this idea that, but wait a minute, it doesn't really matter what we look like. I mean, you could be Hispanic or wearing a hijab, or, you know, be an Orthodox Jew, and we are all striving for the exact same thing.
And we're all Americans, you know.
We're all Americans, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what is so crazy, and I don't think ironic's the word, but hypocritical is essentially, you know, the country was founded on religious freedoms. It was founded by people seeking religious freedom. Yeah. So how can we, you know, go against that as, you know, founding fathers of our nations came here? And of course, you know, that's, you know, riddled with another history of, you know, repression for the Native American whose land was stolen. Yeah. So it's a
complicated. They've never gotten justice for that.
Never gotten justice for that. No, I mean, they're, you know, they're talk about culturally effacing. I mean, their culture has been entirely, you know, disseminated from the earth just about. You know, you know, it's awful. So, yeah, you know, it's an important message, and I think another thing, you know, for anyone watching the show that may have a hard time with the subject content, and or may feel somehow like, well, I'm white, I never had to deal with this stuff. It's like, you know, I think everybody has, because, you know, everybody has been the odd man out, the stranger, you know, having the secret hidden of some sort of thing that has made them feel like they've had to conform. Mm-hmm. And that has taken away the voice and the authenticity and uniqueness of who they are. So,
yeah, it's been interesting. Like, a lot of audiences, I would say, like particularly white audiences, their reaction to the film has been really wonderful. The thing that's really lovely is I go back to this term empathy, and I'm finding that a lot of my work has to do with that. Is the idea that though you may not have experienced these types of things in this way, there are other things in your life that are similar. So by experiencing it and by watching this character go through these things and have to live this way, that empathy is automatically there. So that by the end of the film, the sort of tragic ending that it has, you're angry at the main character for doing it because you want him to be stronger. And unfortunately, he's not in that moment. So I'm hoping that like you said, this idea of like we've all had these feelings and we've all felt this way in some way, shape, or form. But to be able to empathize with someone who doesn't look like you and understand that, oh, I'm not alone here. They feel that too. And they actually might feel that in a very different way than I do, in a more intense way. And I never really thought of that. Just that idea, just that little light bulb going on is, I feel like I've done my work at that point.
That's great. That's great, man. That is the goal, sure.
Yeah.
And leading us to the last question, how have you been changed since making this movie?
Oh, how have I been changed? So I trust myself as a storyteller more. And whatever fear I would have had about telling stories that are diverse, like not just necessarily cast diverse, but diverse stories. Like this story is a story built on diversity. It doesn't exist without that. I think that's changed me in terms of the types of stories that I'm pursuing now. I'm no longer worried about sort of commercial gain or commercial viability too much, because I'm realizing, wait a minute, if I stick to my guns like I did here, people respond to it and people like it. And people want to watch that, whether they know it or not. They do want to watch this type of stuff. So that's changed me in terms of the way I think about the sort of process and the art, quote unquote. But as a person, I think it's interesting that we started talking about voice in the beginning, because I think that's what it's really helped me with. That's how it's changed me. It's helped me trust myself, trust my voice, trust that the things that I'm thinking about aren't just flights of fancy, that there is something there, and to not be afraid of that and to run with those ideas and see where they take you, or take me in particular, and see what happens. So I think that's kind of how it's changed me, I'd say.
Do you think it's fair to say that it's allowed you to accept yourself more?
I'm so sorry, say that again?
Do you think it's fair to say that in retrospect, or since after making the movie, you are more comfortable with yourself, more able to accept yourself?
Oh yeah, big time, big time. I mean, I go back to that fraud complex thing.
Yeah.
This is maybe the first time where I've realized, yeah, I'm not a fraud. I'm good at what I do, and the things I want to say are important. And we always want to feel important, I guess. But in this case, in this project in particular, I do feel like I'm putting a story out there of worth that's necessary. I think maybe that's one way that's changed me too. It's this idea of like, if you're going to put out work, it should be of some merit, of value. And not to say that what everyone's doing isn't of worth and of value, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it doesn't have much substance to it. I mean, there's plenty of Hollywood films that you see that have no substance, plenty of stories that don't have substance. But I think that's what's changed me. It's this pursuit of substance in everything I do. I had this conversation actually with a friend. So in terms of like what I choose to act in now, it's very important for me that the pieces have something to say, opposed to just existing. Because if it doesn't have anything to say, that's not only interesting, but sort of vital to the conversation that we're living in right now, what's the point? And I think that's maybe how this project has changed me the most, is how I look at different stories, different projects, different things that I experience, and value it in terms of, is this necessary or is this not? And if it's not necessary, maybe there's something else that is necessary that I can give my time to. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, it's redefining value.
Yeah. And it's been cool too, because at least if you want to talk about career stuff, like I've been working on a couple of features that I've been writing, and the way it's kind of gone in terms of like where I started a couple of years ago writing in terms of the stuff I'm writing right now, it's like night and day. And I think this project helped me do that because I had to dig deep in terms of not just exploring myself, but exploring the world around me and exploring how that world is affecting not only me, but the people around me, and trying to figure out a way to mine that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, honestly, this has just made everything better. It's made the work better. It's made my work better. And yeah, it's just made me see the world in a more clear way, I guess.
That's awesome. I mean, that's beautiful. And that's, I think if nothing else, I think oftentimes artists start out making art because it's an experience of unity, right? They have some sort of experience, which is, as we started this phone call, I told you I'm a bit of a yogi, but in terms of, I subscribe to yoga practice, the asanas, and also the hymns and whatever, and the texts. But I'm not clear on what the distinctions are between Hinduism and Sikhism, right? So I'd like it's, I mean, since this movie is about Pagg and about, educating ourselves on each other's cultures and valuing each other's cultures and each other's perspectives. I thought maybe you could take a minute to explain that for us.
Sure. A little bit about Sikhism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are the key spiritual texts?
Yeah. Okay. So the key spiritual text is the Guru Granth Sahib. That's like our Bible. It's the collection of holy texts and everything. Sikhism is one of I think it's the 10th largest religion in the world at this point. It's a monotheistic faith, a belief in one God.
Yep.
And there are 10 spiritual leaders in the faith. They're called gurus, starting with the first one, Guru Nanak, going up to the 10th Guru Gobind Singh.
And these are deceased?
Yes, they're all deceased at this point, yeah. But they were like the 10 spiritual leaders. The way I would compare them maybe to Christianity would be the apostles.
Right.
They're the ones that taught the faith and kind of built onto the tenets, from starting from the first leading up to the 10th. Wow. I'm trying to think of how do I parse this. Maybe it'd be easier if you have specific questions.
Well, okay. So I guess, is there any overlap? I mean, it seems like there's overlap between Sikhism and Hinduism. Is there?
Context, which I always feel like is good to do when you're talking about religion.
I'm sorry, say that again. You just cut out for a minute.
Sure. So if you want to talk about it from a historical context, which I always think is healthy when you're talking about different faiths and religions, you can see a very direct line from Islam and Hinduism with a little bit of Buddhism in there in Sikhism. So one of the big differences from Hinduism that Sikhism has is that it's a monotheistic faith, and it doesn't have the caste system. So that was one of the major reasons, as far as I can tell, that the religion was formed, was to get rid of the caste system that the Hindus had.
So is the caste system indigenous to some sort of spiritual text?
That I can't speak with any great confidence. I just know it is ingrained in Hinduism. It's kind of the idea of the reincarnation cycle. So the idea is that if you live your dharma, you'll have good karma, you'll get reincarnated to a higher caste, right? So the highest, I think, is Brahmin, and the lowest is the untouchables, which...
Right. I wonder where that came from, because, I should do some research after the show to see where that came from.
I always like to say it's everyone's racist.
Right.
My one friend Chris and I, we always joke that, like, white people don't have a lock on racism. Everyone's racist.
Right.
So, like, in India, when everyone's brown, what's the way you can subjugate people to work for you? Oh, you're darker, you're less educated, whatever it is. Great. This is the system we're going to put in place to rule over you.
Yeah.
So Sikhism very much was like leaving that behind, and it's like, wait a minute, we shouldn't do this. This may not be the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
And to be fair, in modern Hinduism, the caste system doesn't exist, although it is practiced in some areas in India still, but it's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm studying some of the texts, and having studied yoga, yoga translates to union, and I think the reason I'm kind of going on this riff is because you're talking about I asked what did you learn, and how have you changed really, and you said self trust, acceptance, and you made this comment, everybody wants to be important, and I think there's it starts out, in my opinion, with having an ego. And so the ego wants to be important, right? But then there's the Atman, or the soul, or the spirit, or whatever that thing is that's stripped away of the ego. If we're talking to somebody who doesn't believe in the spirit, that's cool. But that thing which is without the ego, and that thing, I think, wants to have this sense of union, and it wants to fight injustice and redirect it. And in order to do that, there has to be this union with the self, right? This going deep and accepting the things that are within us that have, are ridges for whatever reason, and smoothing those out so then we can see others. I mean, ultimately, it's like, look, how do you see the guys in the truck as what one spiritual leader would say, God in drag? How do you see them as, cool, you know what I mean? Whatever. How do you not let that charge
Get you.
your aggression get you? Exactly. So you're not continuing the cycle of hate. How do you love that?
How do you love that? I feel like,
I mean, that's so a bit of it. That's tough. You know what I mean? I'm trying to do it. I don't know. Help me out.
Yeah, man, it's tough. I mean, so in Pagg, I have a character who doesn't respond to it, and he tries to pyro, and inevitably he makes a bad decision in the end. But in my life personally,
but he does respond to it, right? I mean, just because he doesn't fight physically with them, he compromises his own integrity.
Right, but is that a good decision or a bad decision?
It's a poor one for him.
For him, yeah, it works. I mean, he's also got other responsibilities to deal with his family. And
no. I'm saying it's a poor decision for him.
Oh, poor decision. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think for me, and obviously chasing a truck while just trying to get an iced tea is not a good decision.
But it's a very honest one. It's human. It's like, right? So how do you evolve the consciousness, which is what you're doing through your storytelling, starting with your own?
Yeah, I think it's through empathy, and it's through knowledge. I think it's really just about conversation. It's like the more you know, the less. I think that's very much the symptoms of the world we're seeing right now. Even though we have information at our fingertips, it seems like we know less. And as a result, we can empathize less. We feel less towards our fellow man because we just know less. But I think I really do believe in knowledge being power, So the more you know about someone else's story, how they grew up, why are they the way they are, the more you can empathize and sympathize with them. And then the more you can kind of leave the bullshit behind and move forward from there. That's kind of the way I take it. Yes, I might get angry in moments. I get angry quite frequently right now. But I always remind myself, I'm like, wait a minute, these people are coming from a place. There's a reason why they are the way they are. Now, I could be furious, or I could try and figure out a way to help my community or learn more about them so we can try and stop the cycle. I think is ultimately what it is.
And take them into your community.
Yeah. For one of the, so like, my sort of history with Sikhism, I guess, is, growing up, my parents are Sikh, and, we did the whole thing, and then I fought against it. And I was like, I don't want any of this Indian stuff. I don't want to be Sikh. I don't want any of this stuff. And one of the things that Sikhs wear is this bracelet. It's called a kara. And I stopped wearing it for a good 15 years. And then when I decided to make this movie, and I was like, oh, I know what this is. I know this story. I know because I know my family. I know what this is. And I had to put the bracelet on again to play the character.
And I haven't taken it off. Represent?
Yeah, it's so in Sikhism, there's the 5 Ks. And one of the Ks, they're like, things that you adorn yourself with that are part of the faith, right? One of them is the long uncut hair. That's one of
Dude,
the
your
ones.
hair was beautiful in the film. Was that your real hair?
No, man, the beard was mine. The beard
Oh
was
shit!
mine.
I was like, damn, dude, that is a
That
gorgeous mane, dude.
that was a beautiful wig that we got from the wig shop in LA.
Oh, nice.
We spent a little bit of money on it
Yeah.
because
Huh.
it had to look real. It had to
looks
look
it.
real. And honestly, that's probably what my hair would look like that long.
Yeah.
I got nice hair.
Dude, well, you know what you got to do, bro.
Yeah, I got to grow it out.
Yeah.
I got to play Brown Jesus in my
That's it, dude.
But yeah, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, it's
the curry of the 5 things that you.
Oh, the cover. Yeah. So now I wear it. It feels comfortable. It's like you're
that's
saying,
cool, man.
you know, the idea of unity and finding that sort of like losing the ego that we had before. I think through the last 2 years, I have had a lot of losing my ego and being like, you know what, we got to be accepting, we got to be open as much as possible. And I think.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, bro, but I was just getting inspired. I mean, I think wearing the bracelet is partly accepting your family.
Oh, big time.
You know,
for me,
right?
Yeah, no, totally. I was actually vacationing a couple months ago or last month with some family members in Europe, and it dawned on me that one of the reasons I took this off was I didn't want to be assumed to be Sikh in public because I wasn't doing any of the stuff because I wasn't of the faith. And then after I made this movie, I realized, well, wait a minute, I am kind of doing a lot of the faith. I'm not doing the maybe religious tenets, but all the messaging, the good stuff, love one another, all that kind of stuff, all the good juju from all the faiths. I'm doing that right now. And then also putting this on made me feel good because, like you said, it was a connection to my family. It was a connection of where I came from, and it didn't have to necessarily be a religious thing for me. It was a more holistic thing. It was more than religion for me at that point. And I realized, oh, this is important. And it also just felt right. Like, honestly, my wrist feels naked without it on.
I know what you mean. Yeah, that's very cool.
Which, I don't think of a better sign than that. But, and it's also like, to go back to the idea of accepting people, there's this sort of, I feel like people have this inherent sort of block against opening themselves up and accepting people that they may disagree with, that they may not understand. But the reality is if you can find a way to open yourself up, there's a level of understanding that can be gleaned there. And you may not agree, but there can be some sort of understanding and hopefully growth from that, hopefully on both sides.
That's profound. I mean, that is the challenge, you know, and that's, I think that is like the practical takeaway. Is like, how do you do that with, because whether you're right or wrong, or this attachment to the idea of right or wrong, if you can listen to the other, you will gain.
Yeah. Well, it's this idea of binary, right? Like the right, wrong.
Right.
Why do we always have to be right or wrong? Can't we live in a gray area and just be like, yeah, I mean, we have to honor facts and we need to know what facts are. But there's also this idea of living in a gray area where it's like, we don't have to be right or wrong. We can just have a conversation.
Yeah.
God forbid we have a conversation where we can just sort of like talk about issues and, you know, about one another and understand, and then go off to your separate corners. But everyone has to be right in every moment. Everyone has to be wrong in every moment. And the reality is people aren't smart enough to be right in the moment anymore.
Right always changes. Wrong can sometimes change too. And I guess, you know, having that flexibility to grow is the key.
I don't begrudge people for learning, I think is the thing. Like, you may think something in one moment and then you might realize, wow, I was an idiot. I need to rethink what I thought. And I don't begrudge people that. I think that's healthy and that's good. I begrudge people when they are just locked. You know, when they're like, nah, I think one way and that's it. You know, that's when I get upset, and then I have to be like, okay, how do you process this?
Yeah, totally. That is definitely, you know, a human struggle. And I think, you know, that your film adds a lot of richness to evolving that conversation and an evolutionary, you know, understanding of one another, man. It's a great flick. It's a great work. Thank you for being on the show, man. It's an honor. Thanks for stepping into the gray here. And I want to acknowledge Margaret Ketch and Ronnie Jiva from Control Alt Delete, who played it forward by nominating filmmaker, writer, director, actor, and producer Nardeep Khurmi. I like rolling the R, but do you roll the R traditionally?
Khurmi?
Khurmi.
No.
Yeah.
Khurmi. No, I mean, I guess you could. You know,
Yeah.
and there's so many different ways to say it. You go to a different region in India, they're saying it differently. The
Yeah.
way that I grew up saying was Khurmi.
Khurmi.
So there's a little bit of a roll.
Yeah, I can't help myself, man. I don't know what it is. Nardeep Khurmi, Pagg is the flick. Thanks for being on the show, bro. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks for having me.
You got it, buddy. All right. Till next time, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.
All right.